Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this panel. My name is Patel from Optum Ventures. I'm joined here today by a brilliant cast of experts and key opinion leaders from across industry, and really here to talk about the future of digital health and how we think that COVID has impacted on this. I'm co-chairing this panel alongside André from Heeg from BCG Digital Ventures. Perhaps if we could do a round of introductions from André and then all of the panelists, just so everyone knows who's speaking. And then love to dive into some interesting questions which we've been talking through already.
So hi everyone, my name is André. I'm a partner with BCG Digital Ventures, where I'm leading in Europe our healthcare business, which basically means we are partnering with large corporations to start and co-create new ventures. And very exciting to talk to with my panel today about what are the opportunities in the digital era. Especially in healthcare, given the COVID pandemic and everything we have seen over the last year. So I hand over to, I guess, Elena, as the first one on the panel to introduce herself.
Thanks very much, André. Good morning, good time zone, wherever you are in the world today. My name is Elena Bonfiglioli. I'm the Managing Director and Regional Lead for Healthcare and Life Sciences at Microsoft for the Europe, Middle East, and Africa region, speaking to you from Brussels today. Nice to meet you.
Ittai, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Ittai Harel. I'm with Pitango Venture Capital. We're based in Israel. We manage about $3 billion in total. I am a managing partner and run the HealthTech fund, which is dedicated to investing in health tech ventures, usually seed, early stage kind of A and B rounds. And I'm delighted to be here and speak with everyone.
David?
Thanks, Ash. Hi, I'm David Cole. I lead IBM's Watson Health consulting practice across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And I also run a children's charity where we look to bring the future of healthcare to children, and a podcast associated with that. And I'm, as you can probably tell, in the UK, so I'm in Oxford in the UK.
Patrick?
Thanks, Ash. Hi, everybody. My name is Patrick. I'm in Zurich at the moment. I'm a partner with the Zühlke Group. We are 1,200 engineers, mainly in Europe and Asia. I'm running the investment arm. We're focusing on health technologies, health tech. We have active portfolio in the US and Europe. And we are very excited about the opportunities over the next years in this space.
And finally, Klaus. Klaus, you're on mute.
Klaus Stoeckemann, I'm based in Berlin, managing partner of Peppermint VenturePartners. We're investing in digital health and medical devices, and of course are very excited to be in Germany because of the Digital Care Act and the possibility to get apps reimbursed by the statutory health insurance companies in Germany.
Well, thank you all for joining. I thought we could dive straight in. And I suppose the first question which we had in our minds is really, what have historically been the barriers to making digital health a mainstream way of delivering healthcare? And how do you guys think that COVID has helped to shift some of those barriers, and how has industry responded to overcome these challenges? Perhaps if we just start, let's start with André, for example, and we'll work our way around the group.
Yeah, I think in the past, there have been a couple of hurdles, especially around a few main areas. Like one was the regulatory aspect, right? Like especially people with a tech background or with a business background that identified healthcare as an opportunity were a bit nervous and scared by all the regulatory requirements you have to meet and getting approved and so on. So it was just this obscure type of field, right? The next thing is probably the complexity, right? So healthcare, as we all know, is a very, very complex type of business you can deal with. You have multi-layered stakeholders, patients, physicians, payers, pharma. So that has been too complex for some people to deal with it. And I probably would say the last big hurdle was the slow rate of adoption of innovation in healthcare, right? So I allow myself to say this because I'm a doctor myself, right? Doctors are a very traditional bunch. So what works, you usually try and do and don't really mess up with what is already working. Bringing innovation to healthcare has not been the easiest task, right? So maybe these are my free statements on healthcare in the past. But they're curious to hear from the panel what you have seen.
I'm happy to go if that works. So I obviously agree with what you say, André. I think it can be even more basic than that. There's a situation whereby I'll take the UK as an example. There's still some hospitals still using paper, so you can't move into a digital environment and utilize some of the systems that we inevitably will be talking about and that we like to look at from an AI perspective, from data and analytics. If everything's still housed and written on paper, you need to have obviously digitalize that at its core. I think what kind of COVID has allowed us to do is it's taken some of the bureaucracy out of that and actually meant that people have had to move forward quicker and embrace technologies. Well, again, using an NHS example and for Elena's benefit, using Teams, for example, right? So everyone's moved to Teams, everyone's doing things remotely as we are now. So there's needed to be that necessity. And I think it was funny, about a month, 6 weeks into COVID, we were laughing that the NHS had moved more in 5-6 weeks than they had in the last 20 years. We're a year into that now, and I think that number still rings true. And hopefully, not just in the UK, but everywhere we're starting to see and understand the benefits and in the necessity to move into some of these new technologies.
Thank you, David. And maybe I'll pick up from that. I think I would very much agree with the underlying motive of what you're saying. In a way, we were also lacking a compelling event. Unfortunately, the compelling event was not the one that anyone would desire. But all of a sudden, there was no other way than doing digital and being digital, which is two different things, right? The ability to move 1.3 million, health professionals from the NHS into Teams in just a matter of a few weeks shows us two things: that the complexity that has always been there, was not because the technology was not available, but because we didn't have that compelling event that made us as human beings change how we do things. And we know that the complexity is always there, but at the same time, the enabling technologies are available, I would say are mature for scale adoption. So this brings me to another consideration, which is really the ability to think beyond point projects. All of us, all around the world, we have been doing a lot of investments in demonstrating some of the very deep innovation, but also that meant that we have disregarded somehow the more basic foundational thing. Just imagine the whole world embracing telemedicine, as we have been saying in many papers. That single act, which is, very important, would save healthcare a lot of costs and would bring patients the most important thing, which is better experiences at the time and at the place that they need it. Not as a unique interface, but as a possible alternative where most needed, like in these cases. So that complexity, I think, remains there, but the compelling event shows us that we have miles to go, and also that the resilience and the trust is there to enable us, because technology is both resilient, so it can scale up, and it can offer the trust. Thank you.
I'll jump in, just add and try not to repeat some things. I think, I'll start maybe by saying that I recall about 2 years ago, presenting about telehealth and the use of telemedicine. and talking about predictions that in 10 years it'll grow to use of like 15%. And you look at what happened here, within 6 to 12 months, the increase in use of, telehealth is almost 100-fold from where we were a year ago, if not more so. So I think the biggest thing that happened in the last year is just there's been a mental change. Many systems, like in Israel, have been digitized 15 years ago, the US the last few years, and certain parts of Europe. But still, we didn't leverage that. We didn't utilize the data. We were afraid to address the issue of privacy. And this issue, this term of COVID just pushed everyone, pushed regulators, pushed physicians, consumers, and all of us to understand that we can't continue without it. And we have to adopt what we adopted in fintech and in shopping and our lives in other areas into healthcare. And I think that's really happened big time. I will say that there are still a couple areas that I see major issues, just to touch on. I think still, despite digitization being there, that providers, their IT infrastructure is still very old school, very difficult to integrate new technologies. And I think many of us and many startups know how difficult it is to still to do things there. And it's not easy. Cloud, all sorts of terms are new to them. And the other thing I would say is that cybersecurity and true trust and the ability to use AI and anonymized data, I think are big challenges that are still ahead of us. I mean, but there are also opportunities for many of the entrepreneurs kind of listening in. So I'll stop there.
Okay, then I go next. I think I'd like to add one aspect. I think I agree with everything that was said. I'd like to add an aspect which is from a different point of view, is that, the healthcare system, the delivery had a monopoly on the actual delivery. And so if you wanted to get a treatment or if you wanted to have a diagnosis, you had to go to the healthcare system. And the technologies weren't really there yet to actually shift that service to the home, to the consumer. And this is now happening. This has happened over the last, say, 10 years with the advent of smartphones, with the advent of highly miniaturized sensor systems, active actuators, and so forth. And I think this is now coinciding together with that drive or that need to change something. I think it has been a tipping point in the technologies that are available now coming from consumer devices. And I think that is going to boost massively.
So maybe I go last. And I was kicked out. I think for me, it was interesting to see the last years here in Europe, how things were progressing very, very slowly in terms of adoption. Clubs and entrepreneurs, it was very difficult to answer the question, who is going to pay for the solution they are going to develop, right? With COVID, suddenly, the whole thing sparked tremendously on telemedical applications, on online consultation. And just a year before COVID in Germany, they did allow finally to abandon the so-called teleconsultation kind of thing, Fernverhandlungsverbot in German, so that you can basically consult with a doctor and even get a diagnosis through a telephone line or a video thing, right? That suddenly was there. And now with COVID, even in Germany, online consultation for chronic diseases. And I think COVID again, which was clear to us, suddenly showed to everybody how meaningful digital applications are. So for founders, however, how do you get paid for it? It is not a B2C market. It is a B2B market here in Germany and I think across Europe. So Germany was able to install this Digital Care Act actually before COVID. And now, meanwhile, 10 are reimbursed, some of them even permanently, and the others have to show their meaning in 12 months. This is a major step forward, but did COVID impact on this? development? No, but I think applications in COVID have become. And so I think after COVID,
I think the connectivity is not that stable for Klaus, right? Or is it just me? No.
No, I think we've lost him now. He's
We lost him now.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So maybe we switch to the next point, right? So we talked a little bit and touched a little bit about on telehealth adoption rate and so on, and the shift that has happened and all the positive momentum that we see in the digital health market. Maybe Ash, from your perspective, starting, like, where do you still see our new opportunities, additional opportunities that are not fully leveraged yet, and where do you see further chances for growth?
So perhaps picking up on what David and Elena touched on earlier, I think, and part of our investment thesis at Optum Ventures is that healthcare IT infrastructure is still a market which is massively underserved. It's improving with the installation of electronic health records in most major hospital systems across Europe and North America. But I think it's fair to say there's still gaps in that coverage, and there are indeed hospitals you can go to where things still run on paper and Excel spreadsheets, and eventually that needs to come into the 21st century, frankly. There's with that though, there's additional opportunities to think about how do you build healthcare IT infrastructure which is perhaps more fit for purpose for smaller systems that have specific bespoke requirements that need configuration, and maybe don't have huge IT support teams in order to be able to provide ongoing support for these services. I think Elena's example of Teams being able to be rolled out was really powerful. I mean, that's something which has been done seamlessly from what I understand, and with little to no difficulty in training staff and getting them up and running. So that's an example of a product which has great consumer discipline in terms of how it works and its functionality, being married with a business use case and then put into an enterprise environment very, very quickly. I think there are other examples available of where that could be done in pathology, in radiology, in the actual health records themselves. The second area, which I think where there is still opportunity, and in fact opportunities now emerging, it's a feature of where patients went during COVID and where they are now. So if you look at data being published at the moment, you can see that telemedicine is kind of stabilizing between 7 and 10% of all consultations in most major developed world health systems, which means that 90% have gone back to the clinic again, back from zero, back in May of 2020. And what's happening is that clinics are now trying to run hybridized models, whereby they're trying to see some of the patients. Sometimes they see them online, sometimes they bring them in, depending on what's necessary for that patient. That requires a couple of things. Firstly, really good care coordination. So understanding what the patient needs and what type of appointment they need is super important. The second thing is then thinking about how do you run a organization from a people perspective so that you have the right people in the right environments. And so I think technology has a role to play there in terms of figuring out really excellent, almost customer service type discipline to understand what it is that your patient or your customer needs at this point in time, and making sure you have the appropriate people available to be able to service that need as and when it arises. So I think there's two main buckets: healthcare IT infrastructure and also service hybridization, to be a blend of both online and offline, are going to be two themes that really start to grow up in 2021 and beyond.
Ash, if I may, I was going to say something similar in terms of, we've just kind of discussed telehealth, but I think it's very much at the tip of the iceberg. If you speak to clinicians, they want to keep their patients out of hospital as much as they possibly can. I mean, we've all, I'm sure, heard cases of where, unfortunately, patients have come into hospital and contracted coronavirus as a result of it. And obviously before coronavirus, there were other cases of contracting other things whilst in hospital. In some ways, the safest place to be as a patient is at home, and only coming in as you said, as and when they absolutely need to. So I think telehealth is something that we're going to be seeing a lot more of, and we need to be seeing a lot more of, and we need to absolutely be having those kind of right scheduling systems to make sure we've got the right people in and bringing everything around that. But actually my kind of main point was, in terms of answering your question, André, was data. So, again, data is kind of the overarching principle for a lot of this, but we're still not really making the most of the data that we've got. Depending on what you read, 1 or 2% of the data that is actually captured is analysed, and actually a lot of the money that is spent on utilising the data is all about cleaning it up to putting it into a state where it can be utilised. So you've got all of these. So we're starting to see a shift, but there's a lot more to it. You could argue that actually the systems that haven't, or the institutions that haven't put specific systems in place to capture the data are at an advantage, because they can start capturing it in the right way, as opposed to then needing retrospectively to do all the analysis to get it to a point where actually you can point, your algorithms to it, or your AI systems to it, or whatever it might be. So there's such a great opportunity, and from an entrepreneurial perspective and a wearables point of view, bring that in as well. And you've hopefully got a kind of perfect storm in terms of the opportunity.
I think this is part of a really, in my opinion, a massive shift, because medicine has been or is an experience-based science. So basically, it's what worked in the past is taught down the line and works now. And this is a shift now towards a more evidence-based science, because we have the data and because we have possibility to use that data to move forward. And if you take that, there will be a shift as well from activity-based care. So you treat someone and you hope for the best, towards more of a value-based healthcare, where you actually are able to measure if your treatment is working or not, or which molecule is suited for you, and then you're in personalization of treatment as well. And I think it's all rooted in data, really managing data and making sure that you only send people to service centers, let's call it that way, when they're absolutely needed to go there. And we're just scratching the surface, really. And telehealth is really just the tip of the iceberg. I fully agree.
So I would love to follow up on that. From an infrastructure perspective, I think that both that ability to leverage data in resilient and interoperable data platforms is the paramount opportunity that we have now. And when I talk about really putting the foundations right, I think that a massive investment in full interoperability is foundational, because that data liquidity, that data mobility, that ability to really, not spend all the time curating those data starts from the availability of working with APIs and working with standard-based like FHIR. So fast healthcare interoperability resources. We have seen the acceleration that the mandate for FHIR and interoperability is driving in the US. I would actually wish that a lot of the same was being accelerated in Europe as well. Once we have that interoperable rate track, then I think that from an infrastructure from the ground up, you can have health systems at regional or national or hospital level putting together data platform upon which you can reason over data, but also you can map some of the data that are on-prem in their journey to cloud from a standard-based perspective and build journeys. Because some of you have spoken about experiences, right? How we transform that hybrid experience when it's needed to have a Teams-based and online interface, when it's needed to have a smart health bot maybe that does some triage, and when it's needed to have that face-to-face consultation or go to the hospital. All of that needs openness, interoperability, and redesign of experiences that is not possible today if we don't do the foundational work in the right way. And actually, it was almost a year ago that on the Microsoft side, we launched the Microsoft Cloud for Health, which was actually a redesign of that foundation to make sure that organizations could leverage an hybrid and capability-based platform instead of having point solutions that they needed to stitch together all the time.
Jumping just to add a thought, maybe. I completely agree with all the challenges stated here. One thing that I found is that for entrepreneurs and innovation to just, to try to address some of the issues we're raising through innovative technologies is very hard, very difficult. You run into a lot of issues of adoption and working with providers and partners. I think that's why I'm a big fan, and several of you have spoken this, but of the area that people call, tech-enabled healthcare services. I think, Ash touched on this. I think one of the fundamental things that is happening behind all this is that the model of medicine is just changing. And I think that for companies that are employing, approaches of just introducing new technologies, and I know I'm simplifying here, and just things that are involved around software and operating systems and so forth, it's really difficult to make a big successful play quickly, and it's difficult to drive change. If you bring solutions forward that are coupling both technology and a valuable service, either with a partner or yourself, I think if you look at the past kind of 2 or 3 years, we'll find that many of the biggest successes in the companies that have been able to make a big dent have taken this approach. And I continue to believe this for a while will be a very major of what we see, kind of at least I think for the next decade. So again, I'm just kind of throwing out the focus on services as part of this discussion in technology.
Mm. I like that a lot. Yeah, I was thinking a bit about what was said, right, and reflecting on my own past as a surgeon, right. So if you just think about like what data can do in terms of and the service layer that it could provide, yeah. And just to bring it a little bit to life, when you are a surgeon, you're basically operating on a patient and you hope that everything goes well. But we know there are some patients that basically have complications, right? With data, it allows you actually to, on the one hand, for the operating surgeon, to predict the risk that a patient walks into, right? Like, hey, this is a high-risk patient, complication rate might be higher or lower. And on the patient side, you can actually manage expectations, right? You can communicate, hey, you have a high risk of like something is like healing takes longer or whatnot, right? With data, you can predict these things and you could provide a service that enables both sides in order to create a better experience and outcomes at the end.
I think it's a very good point. Who's the service for? I mean, it's ultimately we talk about huge platforms and interoperability, and I fully agree. But you could compare the situation maybe somewhat that we have now to the telecom industry in the 90s, and so it's quite interesting. How do you start platforms? How do you start these huge systems? And it's I'm of the same opinion that you start small and you create a simple, understandable, effective service for someone. And the question is, for who? Is it the medical industry? Is it the pharmaceutical industry? Do you help them to innovate? Is it the consumer? Is it the healthcare system? And I think that's the interesting questions to answer. And there's no magic bullet. But I think the old game of SaaS business is still applies. You need to start with an effective, efficient solution for a valuable solution for someone who's able to pay.
Just like picking up on that, I think, and also blending with one of Ittai's comments from earlier in terms of the challenge for entrepreneurs who are innovating in the space. The minimum viable product, the MVP in healthcare, is often significantly a much more heavy lift than what you might have to build in other industries. So if you want to launch even something as simple as a scheduling service that lets someone book in to see their doctor, for example, if you were doing that for a local travel agent, then it would be pretty low barrier. I mean, frankly, you've got to connect to their Outlook and know when their slots are and tell people when they could book in. Like Calendly can do that for you. But if you want to do that in a physician setting, You have to have compliance with various types of information governance, regulatory rules. You have to be able to integrate into systems which perhaps were never designed to be interoperable. So I think one of the challenges of, whilst I understand entirely and I agree that there's a virtue in starting small and iterating and building up, the definition of small in healthcare is bigger than in other industries. That's the real challenge. So like saying we're going to start it in our bedroom and get going is actually significantly tougher unless you have experience from the industry, access to people willing to try it, even on a pilot basis. And certainly speaking from our portfolio, where we've seen the most successes come forward has been with companies where from the get-go, there's been somebody in the team who has almost like KOL type knowledge of the industry which they're going after. So they are they've merged their experience with someone who's outside of healthcare with somebody who is inside of healthcare. And so you've got the outsider's naivety and technological approach, which pushes boundaries and gets things done. And you've got the insider saying, actually, this is the route we need to navigate if we're going to make this a reality. And those kind of partnerships tend to work quite well. The third element is, and perhaps an area to think about here is, and love to hear from others in the group, particularly those from the large corporates, but also from the investment side as well, the large incumbents in the industry. So this has still not yet been an industry where you can just disrupt everything, primarily because the ultimate payer, certainly in Europe, and if you look at if the data is to be believed, also in the US, the ultimate payer is often the government. They have a legal responsibility for their citizens, and you can look at Medicare, Medicaid, and the amount spent in the US by the US government on those particular systems, and certainly the German, French, Italian, UK healthcare systems are all ultimately government-backed in the long run. So you can't disrupt the payer angle as easily. And so a lot of these startups have to figure out how do they work with these particular payers and how do they innovate in an environment where there are going to be some fixed points and you can't do everything with a blank piece of paper. Would love to hear from others how you think a startup could best try to figure out how to be disruptive and push the boundaries of what's possible, but at the same time realize when to partner with incumbents and when to realize when there are fixed points in the system which you're just not going to move.
Ashish, if you allow me, just a quick thought there. I think your point is very thought-provoking and very right. I see increasing number of enabling platforms, right? Almost like clearinghouses and places that have integrated capabilities, not operated by one player, but by partnership across the ecosystem. And that, I think, will be really an acceleration point for some of these startups that can operate there without having to build it all, but almost providing the high value, almost last mile piece of that platform, right? So I think there is an ecosystem move to more integrated, platform-operated type of services that somehow will not fully transform the public sector or payer business, but will definitely move it forward. And that is going to be trust-based, interoperability-based, but ecosystem-based with last-mile services brought by whoever is most experienced in that part of the service.
Ash, just kind of picking up on that as well. Just this might be slightly provocative, but I think what we are discussing is very much the kind of infrastructure to allow these services to work. But in doing so, we're talking about what we conventionally have, which is a sick care system. You know, so to use the kind of cliche, right? We're talking about how we try and just prevent or help people that are sick. I see that there is an opportunity for startups to actually help in terms of the preventative measures. So how do we do prevention a care system as opposed to always sick care? So, and that's where, so, you know, the larger organizations probably have an opportunity to do the infrastructure from an end to end because providers want that kind of SI capability, but actually keeping people out of hospital, being able to look after yourselves, being able to kind of prevent the prevent going into hospital in the first place. That, I think, is an opportunity that is certainly there. You know, the IBMs of the world are not going to go, I know that Microsoft's slightly different, but the IBMs of the world are not going to look at the consumer products, as it were. So that's an opportunity, and I guess to partner and also to do something aside from to use your definition, the larger enterprises, as it were.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Ittai.
Okay, just a quick thought. You know, if I look at one of the changes that's happened in partnering for many of our startups, you know, traditionally, you know, many healthcare companies partnered with hospital chains, with payers and big provider systems and the big kind of, you know, the Medtronics, J&J's of the world. I mean, I think one of the big partnering as it changed is related to the fact that healthcare is finally getting consumerized. And so you're seeing both the big tech giants and many other consumer-related companies, from, you know, Best Buy to Amazon and others, you know, jumping in the fray, understanding that healthcare is now being emancipated, so to speak, and put in the hands of consumer, and it's going to change. And so I think it's opened phenomenal new partnering opportunities there. The one thing I would just warn, on the one hand, it's huge opportunity. On the other hand, I think setting expectations and understanding is something that takes time. I've seen successes, but I've also seen some big gaps and failures and expectations. So I encourage people to explore partners, and I think we're going to see more and more on that end. But I also would just say that realistically, I think it's important for startups not to take lightly the setting, you know, spending the time to set kind of reality and expectations, viewing every relationship as kind of really a true customer success-oriented experience. I've just been through a portfolio companies with some horrific failures and some huge successes where you just see the impact of such approaches.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's the system we're operating in. It's really is getting tremendously complex, and I think old models don't apply anymore. I mean, we used to call ourselves a medical device investor, and that game is gone. It's this classic medical device investment game is really. It's not the same anymore. So you have different types of partnering of games you can play, and there's patterns emerging now. And one of the patterns is that you replace a pharmaceutical compound, a molecule, with a device combined with a service, sometimes just a service. That's very interesting because that can have preventive action, which is very interesting for insurances, for example. What I also see emerging is that you actually, with your service, you can help medical device or pharmaceutical companies do better research. And then you kind of get, you know, you get very early access to their innovation roadmap and kind of get a lock-in going forward. That's a way to partner with pharmaceutical medical device industry. And then what you said before, Ittai, is really the consumerization, really moving the power away from an eminence-based medicine to an evidence-based medicine, where the consumer can decide what they like to do or not, and that really is kind of the wellness type of service, slowly moving towards the medical side and the regulated side. So this is kind of the three patterns that I observe at the moment.
Klaus, we have you back again.
Yeah, I'm listening. It's interesting to listen because it circles around actually almost the same topics. What I'm a bit missing is that we didn't talk about meaningful solutions and what that really means, because I mean, we are, as VC and others, you as well. I mean, if you look into your deal flow, there are so much redundancies. Each country has their own appointment platform. Of course, there are some exceptions, but you know what I mean? I mean, this is very difficult for me really to pick meaningful, scalable, internationally scalable business models, right? And that as a VC, different to medical devices, Patrick, Peric, by the way, is that if you have a product on the market, a interventional cardiology product, for example, you know that you can scale that in Europe and in the US, right? On the digital solution, our experience is this is not so easy the case. Also, you would think it is, right? And therefore, we're struggling a bit to pick the ones which in the healthcare segment, really developing a solution in terms of a digital therapeutic, for example, or a diagnostic application to make that a real European, maybe, or US case, China or Asian case as such, right? And I think all the things we discussed before, interoperability, reimbursement, of course, is again different in all these jurisdictions. So it's fucking complicated, sorry. And then I think I wonder really whether we actually just have to find a healthcare Netflix, right? And I want to bring this in, especially because I know that Ittai and in Israel, you're working on such models. And I think, do we need not to do everything we can, even it works against us, to build a platform who is really a big platform, who is really having all these things we discussed under one umbrella and be able to have a solution on a global scale, right? Rather than to try to do it in Germany, then you do it in France, you do it in the UK, right? So therefore, I'm a bit now want to take the opposite point. Does it really make sense to invest so much money in digital health?
So I feel like you and I are about to co-found a business live on air at this conference. But I agree with you. There is no multinational healthcare provider. It does not exist. And so there are businesses that offer solutions within that. And perhaps you could argue that some pharmaceutical products and medical device products have achieved national scale, but that is because the biology translates. And then you have regional teams who figure out the pricing models in each country in order to make it work. But that hasn't happened for services. And I guess a lot of what we talk about in healthcare is actually still, to David's point earlier, it's a services business and it's a people business. So yeah, that's definitely a provocative thought. Elena, I felt like you're on the cusp of saying something. I'm going to go quiet for a second.
Yeah, I think there is a part of truth, but for me, it's how far up the stack you know, if you take a platform perspective, you take the foundational perspective, some of those enabling platforms are already there and they are quite global. But then there is only so much that can be done at that level. And if you embed or if you nest on top of that some of the other more tailored, more precise services, then I think you have a path of least resistance to go more global. You know, that's my view of enabling platform that don't do everything, but that put that foundational rail track. And on top of that, you have high value services that allow startups actually to accelerate and to go global more easily. So that it's almost like in the middle ground that I see the future.
Just a quick comment. You know, this is a real dilemma in my mind because, as Klaus, as you said, and MedTech, for example, is built, you know, with the regulatory agencies knowing how each other operate, and there's kind of a transferability system. The governments and regulators, when it comes to data, don't have that today. When you look across countries and you know, nations or continents. And so I think you raise a great point of something that I think will need to change. And I actually think it will. I just don't know how quickly this is going to happen. But I think this last year has been meaningful. And I think one of the tests we're about to see is when I think about what is scalable today, I mean, I wonder if any of the major big, you know, Ping An or Teladoc and companies that have already made some international acquisitions and some of these mental health plays, it's going to be a real test to see if they're able to cross borders, cross geographies effectively and build globally. And I think it'll be interesting to have the discussion in 2 or 3 years. But I think that's a challenge to all of us to think with our companies of you know, how do you do that and where can you do it?
Just very quickly on it, I guess a consideration is all about the adaptability of data to certain, certain different regions around the world. How actually useful is it? If we think about imaging, for example, if you start to train an imaging AI using, for argument's sake, UK data, is that transposable to put it into sub-Saharan Africa? Probably not. So I think that the ability to actually kind of put it into different regions for it and it to be successful and actually usable, I think we need to consider, have those as kind of part of the consideration.
Folks, it looks like we are right out of time. Which seems to have gone by in an absolute flash. I've just had a pop-up saying we've got 5 minutes left. That's brilliant. Sorry, apologies. We're not out of time. We have 5 minutes left. So perhaps picking up on that thread then, interoperability and taking things out, making things globalized. Curious as to what people think about the challenge building up systems in one country's data set and figuring out how do you then globalize that. Be interesting to see if people have come across those challenges in their portfolio and perhaps how these have been overcome elsewhere.
I think it's a huge point. It's a huge point because I don't think it's so easily transferable. And not even talking about regulatory point of view, but it's just we are seeing more and more how important it is to capture a broad range of data to actually have meaningful evidence or outcome. And I think it's something to be observed very, very carefully. Here again, I think we're only in the beginning, and so this problem of being quite local as type of services for whatever reason, and the need to scale as quickly as possible really is a massive gap. It is inherently in the system, and time will tell.
Can I ask a provocative question? Do you think part of it is the way in which we allocate capital to the problem? VCs run generally speaking, time-limited funds. There is a horizon in which you need to show your company's made progress. We're talking about things that are meaningful. How much can you really achieve in a 5-year window?
For me, it's really the platform idea, and also I hate to say, of course, a Netflix for digital solutions, healthcare would be great, but then the question is who owns the value chain, right? Who's owning what from that? And if you think about innovators and developing, let's say, digital therapeutic for, migraine, for example, right? They will not be able to scale that globally without that platform. So now what's the business model? You sell it to the platform, or you do licensing arrangements or revenue sharing models. So the classical VC model compared to MedTech, where you just invest in a next mitral heart valve, for example, right? And it's better, easier to handle, and you get it sold at some point in time to a big corporate, right? If you're lucky, of course. But that's very straightforward. While in the digital health universe, for example, the question is how far you have to get with such a company that it makes it an interesting VC investment. And I know in the US this model works actually quite nicely, but look in Europe, you maybe have 5 or 10 companies who you would say are really so powerful, have enough funding and can make it happen. And then you have thousands, 10,000s of companies who have a tiny solution, not be able to scale them. And that's what I meant, that maybe we have to reconsider how we fund these companies in a way.
My opinion is as investors in that space, we compete for the money of LPs that could invest in other spaces. And our problem is time. It just takes longer. It takes longer because we have regulation, because everything that we discussed before. And I think the main issue for us as investors is time.
I think on that note, that's a brilliant place to just take a pause. I just want to say thank you to everyone participating in such a lively conversation and provocative in places. And thank you for the audience for tuning in, and hope you guys enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yep. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care all.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.